Hello, once again, and welcome to the Bleeding Keyboard. With me this evening, I have got my friend, colleague, good buddy, and all-round great guy, Colin Davies.
Good evening.
Colin, I've sent you a list of questions, so you know what I'm going to ask you. But yeah, the first one that I always ask: which genre do you write in, and how do you define that genre?
I have declared myself to be a horror writer more than anything else recently, though I would probably say I err on the side of horror and comedy.
Right.
How would I define that genre? I define the horror genre as being the greatest genre of them all. It's scary stuff. It's basically tension, can be gory, but not always, can be fear. I think it's about human emotions and using monsters to evoke them.
You just said that you sort of like that you're balancing between horror and comedy.
Yes.
Are they that different, or is there an overlap there?
I think I believe that they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. They work on very similar mechanisms in that in horror, you're trying to set up a scare. So you have a setup, that then has a reveal that creates the emotional arc. And I think you do the same thing in comedy. So the setup of a joke and the setup of a jump scare, I think, are very, very similar. So the jump or the laugh is where you've got the punchline in both of them. So I think they are very similar skills.
And I think that would actually work for a narrative, so that if you can be lulled into an author's rhythm, if I'm reading something of yours and think, oh, he set me up, that was funny. Oh, he set me up, that was funny. Oh, he set me up, shit, that scared the crap out of me.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you are wrong-footing your reader every step of the way, which is kind of a good thing, which is where you want to be, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it, in the idea of wrong footing, because I think, again, that's exactly what you do with a lot of the things. Now, don't get me wrong, there are different types of scares and there are different types of jokes that come along, but the majority of them is that you evoke an emotional response by delivering either what is actually expected. But that's a usual setup. You're writing something about a slasher killer, for example, the old slasher movie type stuff. You have to give the audience what they want. So you have to do the setup, payoff. That's fine. Or you do it by the wrong footing idea, setup, the complete opposite of what they're expecting. And that creates the oddity that goes on in the reader's mind. So, more than any other genre, even though you use tension and you use comedy in things like romance and in children's stories, actually use a huge amount of comedy and horror techniques. It all comes down to that idea of messing with the reader's mind and making them think that they're thinking one thing and then delivering them in a different direction.
Yeah, I think I mean, you mentioned slasher movies, and I think Friday the 13th Part 2, they did it really, really well, where you think that Jason's about to burst into this room because you've heard lots of scratching at a door and lots of things. And then when they open the door, it's the dog that's been missing for the first 40 minutes of the film that's sort of like sat there with a little ribbon in its hair. And just as you're getting the relief thinking, oh, it's only the dog, then yeah, Jason suddenly appears. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your writing schedule?
Oh, I write every day. My main writing schedule is I will have about 4 projects on the go at the same time that are all kind of simmering and in note formation. And as I have ideas, I will work with those until one hits a certain point. Either that will be the project goes live and therefore has a deadline. Like the Halloween one that I'm starting to work on will have a deadline. So that will supersede a lot of other things that are going on at the moment. But I like to have them all there ready to go. But I write every day. I can't remember the actual name of the method, but basically every single day I will do at least 10 to 15 minutes just writing. It could be a poem, could be notes, could be a scene, could be nothing, could be just it's not gibberish. I never do gibberish. I always always ends up being something. It would be like a little character piece or something, and then that will either get stored or it will develop or it will move into something else. So, but when I'm on a project, I try and work on the basis of 500 to 1,000 words per day till, you know, until I'm happy in that project. Though, funny enough, the last big project I did, which is the play, Three Doors Down, that's 9,000 words because it's about an hour-long play. So it's just over 9,000 words, and I did that in 3 days because I just had the idea. It was all there. It was formed in my head. It became very easy. I was almost copying, you know, because it was just there. Where sometimes you got things like the third Mathamagical book, about a third of the way through, and I've had to put it down because I'd hit a wall. I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't find the words to do what I wanted it to do. So I've got to find that bridge that will come out from somewhere.
If you're working on sort of like 4 projects at the same time, is it easy to compartmentalize? Are you able to sort of like switch off, thinking I'm no longer thinking about the Mathamagical third book, now I'm thinking about Three Doors Down? Is it able to flick that switch easily?
I find that very easy. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I know some people do, and they have to concentrate more on those particular projects because we all have our own process. But my mind is running at 100 miles an hour all the time. You know, sometimes I have to sit down and watch a film to stop myself thinking of story ideas or character ideas. It's one of those things. Everywhere I go, I almost walk in a movie. I'm you know, especially at night. That's the worst time because everything looks artificial at night. But that's where my mind is the entire time. I am constantly thinking in story ideas or poems or that kind of creativity. So I have to fill my mind with other creativity. So I'll sit down and read a book just to stop myself thinking about things. You know, I have to do that before I go to bed, otherwise I won't sleep.
I've got to admit, that's why I sort of like stick the headphones on and start listening to podcasts, just because it allows me to research things. But
Yeah.
I usually end up researching, thinking, I have a good idea for a story.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it always ends up.
Yeah.
Always. I had it the other day. I've just been on holiday. We went mudlarking, and so I've never done it before, and we're stood in the mud banks on the River Thames looking for old pots, you know, like Iron Age or Victorian pipes and all that kind of. And I say pipes, I mean little clay pipes that they used to sell. They're almost like disposable cigarettes back then. They were pre-filled with tobacco, and they used to just smoke these things. And I started thinking, wow, could you imagine like finding some human remains here? And then I went, well, if you found the human remains and you're a mudlarker, what if that then took you on a treasure hunt? That meant you ended up in a time wormhole that took you back to the time when these burials were done, and you actually realize that those remains are yours. That's yeah. So that had to be. I've made notes. That's now in the file for working on that later. Yeah,
I'm not surprised. Which nicely leads me on to the next question. So, which is most important to you, plot or character?
I'm gonna have to say, I mean, I really do. I really want to say both because I think both are important, very, very important. I think you can have a plotless or a very weak plot with very strong characters more than you can have a strong plot with weak characters.
I mean, the reason why I said that what you'd said led neatly onto that is because what you'd given me there was an absolutely. Oh, 1 second. What you give me there was an absolutely wonderful plot, a plot where I was thinking, I can't wait to read this because this is going to be a really, really compelling story. But there was no character there whatsoever. This is not me saying you have no character when you go out mudlarking.
No.
Yeah.
No.
That was just sort of like, yeah, he's going to sort of like put whatever character there is on there. So yeah, that was compelling.
That, to be honest though, that was very much an elevator pitch.
Right.
So the plot works really nicely and tightly. But if that then becomes 60,000 words of a story, if it becomes a novel, or if it's like 3,000 to 5,000 words of a short story, which I think is more where it sits, to be honest, if that character is not compelling, you're not going to get to the end of the plot.
True.
So I think that's why I say is I actually think you can get away with a weaker plot if you've got strong characters more than you can get away with a strong plot with very weak characters.
Yeah, I think you're right. I wouldn't. Yeah, part of the reason why I do this is not to criticize anybody's opinion.
No.
It's just that we've got different people's opinions on here. And yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So what piece of writing advice would you give to anybody who's just starting out?
write and read. Before you can read as many how to write books. You can go to creative writing lessons. I mean, seriously, if you can afford it, go to creative writing lessons to listen and learn and constantly work on your craft. But you're never going to work on that craft unless you A, write, and B, read. That's your first two most important bits. And then keep on learning. Never think you can actually do it to the best of your ability, because there's always some new technique or some new idea or some new thought that you can't quite get. So you'll need to lean on somebody else or get the advice from somebody else to be able to get over that bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. And brilliant. So who do you read for pleasure?
Well, currently I'm reading Ashley Lister. Don't know if you've heard of him.
He's brilliant. Yeah.
He's written this new book, you see, and I've been reading that, so that's been quite good fun. And because I'm currently studying as well, I'm reading a lot of children's literature at the moment, funny enough. So I've got Alice in Wonderland. I'm halfway through Watership Down at the moment, which is really good. And I've got The Wind in the Willows there to find the problematic parts of that.
You seen a doctor about that Wind in the Willows?
I'm sure there are pills. I mean, I have very varied. I look at my bookshelf. I look over there where my bookshelf is, and I've got John Cooper Clarke for some poetry. I've got the Dexter novels up there. I've got a few Dexter novels up there, and just looking around. Stuart Lee is he just to see how his brain thinks, more of his autobiography and the sort of work that he's done. And then I'll have old titles. I've got some really old books up there. I've got the Imaginary Conversations with Famous People from around about 1920 or something like that. I can't remember who actually wrote it, but it's a lovely little chat book, and that kind of stuff. And then I read academic papers. I've got this is my latest one, because that's why it's there. I've got the Adapting Frankenstein, which is all about the various adaptations of Frankenstein and adaptation theory and how it's been applied. The basic concepts of it have been applied in almost every kind of genre as well. So that's I pick up everything because it's input, and it will inform something along the line.
I mean, you said that you're reading Alice in Wonderland because it's part of the degree that you're doing.
Yes.
But that's also one of your favourite titles anyway, isn't it? I know that you are a fan. It's very inspirational.
I find it astonishing, actually. I mean, if you separate the art from the artist to start with.
I wasn't going to say a word.
Yeah, no, I'm going to do it because to me it's important. It's kind of like the elephant in the room when you got these kind of things.
Yeah.
As a person, he was very, very intelligent. He was a genius, but he was extremely problematic. Even if at the time it was more accepted, it's still not right the way that he had certain desires and certain hobbies. However, in saying that, Alice in Wonderland, when you consider it to be, it really genuinely is, and you don't find these very often, a first in its class. It was a nonsense story. It used the portals. It's not something that's almost like a retelling of Beowulf, and it's not a retelling of a Greek myth. It had so much imagination wrapped up. It's almost like you can read Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, and you cannot apply any part of that theory onto Alice in Wonderland because of the way that he tells the story. And I don't know if it's because he wrote it episodal, that he was writing it over a period of time because he was telling these stories, so they were more ad-libbed, and that's why it came out that way, this kind of stream of consciousness and then linking it together, or the fact that he might have been completely stoned off his tits on some sort of strange narcotics. I don't know, but it is very, very much as pure a piece of imaginative writing as I think there's ever been.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And again, it shows that conflict from the whole plot and genre thing, because you're reading John Cooper Clarke, who is so character oriented. Each one of his pieces of poetry is based on his wonderful character. Stuart Lee has got such an analytical and hilarious character. But for Alice in Wonderland, it's all about the story. Alice is without trying to be cruel against Alice, but she's got no fucking personality whatsoever.
No, the personality is in the what I can't remember his name now. But you know, the flat characters. Who wrote the Anatomy of a Novel?
Foster.
Foster, that's it.
Yes.
So, you know, here's two-dimensional characters, and that's what they are. All the other characters serve a purpose to push Alice through the story. You know, and the strange thing is like you say, she doesn't really have much of a character about her. She's just a little girl going through a weird landscape. And so, in a funny sort of ways, the other characters are so strong. This is what I'm saying is the plot is a straightforward journey. You know, she's getting from point A to point B, and she's being pushed down that way. More like the way that you'd work a computer game. Like you walk into scene, end of level, boss, beat boss, move on to next level. It's that kind of compartmental storytelling. It's almost like each chapter is a short story on its own. You could take any one of those chapters out, read it on its own, and it will be self-contained. Entrance, middle, end.
Yeah.
You know, and it will do that 3 acts. Each part has those 3 acts. Which, when you read the stuff around it, I mean, when was it? When was it first published? You're talking 1840s, 1830s?
I was going to say 1860.
1860 might be. Well, Macmillan did this one. Loose copies, 1871. Yeah, about 1871. Oh, 1866. There you go.
Oh, I was miles off.
You were very, very on there, weren't you? Look at you. God, anyone would think you had a doctor in PhD or something like that. You look at the other stuff that's around that, and yes, there's some really, really fantastic works that's come before it. You know, you look at things like Frankenstein, incredibly imaginative piece that relies very heavily on stuff that's going on at the time. So it's that classic sci-fi trope that we would see nowadays, where you take something of now and you apply a fear to it, or you will, you know, you just exaggerate it slightly in order to make it fearful. The Alice in Wonderland stuff, I suppose there is stuff of the time in there, but it's so distorted and so grotesque. Things like the playing cards, just seeing playing cards, anthropomorphizing these very ordinary things, you know, using something like a teapot in order to torture, you know, dormouse, and that be the entertainment of the Hare and the Mad Hatter. You know, things like that are just so not connected. Not like Through the Looking Glass. Alice Through the Looking Glass has a few more connections to the real world in it, I think, in the way that it works. I suppose that's a little bit more meta than in Wonderland is. Wonderland, it really just almost like the end. Oh, hang on, spoilers. If you've not seen Usual Suspects, turn off now. But it's almost like it was written the way that the end of Usual Suspects works. It's almost like you're sitting there going, and then Alice did playing cards and teapot, you know, and that kind of thing, and always got a hat, and they had people went mad for hats, didn't they? And it's like that ultimate wordplay on top of all this other stuff, and that's why I think it is. It's just it's almost like it's beyond narrative in that respect.
That would be if Alice actually had the personality of Kaiser Soze.
Well, really, she kind of does, because Kaiser Soze doesn't have a personality in it either when you really think about it.
You're just making me want to watch The Usual Suspects again. Yeah. There's never a time when that's not the right film to watch. So I've got to ask them, in Mathamagical and in Anagramophobia, you write it for a young audience with a pair of texts that are just as much educational as they are entertaining.
Yes.
How do you balance educational content and entertainment in a story?
I use the educational content as the world. Okay, I know it's very straight. It's as you go with the probable worlds theory. So you have you're moving from one world into another. All worlds have a certain number of rules. So I use the rules of whatever it is the educational balances. So in Mathamagical, the place they go to operates on the rules of maths. When Anagramophobia, they go to the land of letters and words. So the rule structure there is based on English grammar.
So that means that, oh God, what's the name of the little lad who walks in both of them?
Ben Small.
Thank you. So that means that Ben, it's almost as though he's playing the idiot and learning these rules for us, the readers, so that we can sort of like interpret how that educational content is going to work.
Yes. And then I put a tiny little twist on it in that, yes, he is the idiot learning as he goes along, but he is the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. He has that one piece of information that the rest of them don't have, which makes him important.
Brilliant, yeah. Which is what makes them such compelling stories, really. And yeah, they are so fun. So does it take a different mindset to write for children than it takes to write for adults?
I'm going to say no, I don't think it does. I think it takes a different mindset when you're editing a book for children to when you're editing a book for adults. I think the line between adult books and children's books is much thinner than a lot of people give it credit for. And I think that's where sometimes we get a problem with children's books nowadays, because people think that it's much wider and therefore try and write for 6-year-olds rather than write for 12-year-olds and get 6-year-olds to read it, which is how it kind of used to be. You write an entertaining story. You sit down and go, I've got a story. It's a bit mental. I'm going to write these things, and then I'm going to look at it and go, actually, it's quite scary. I mean, take Anagramophobia, for example. Anagramophobia, the whole end sequence of that ends up going gothic. He's in a castle. I've got all these gothic tropes on top of these things. He's got a witch in it. The way that he actually wins in the end, it's not giving anything away to know that the protagonist of a children's book wins. It's really cruel. And when you look at the great children's books, Alice in Wonderland, you look at Watership Down, you look at even Wind in the Willows, and you look at Harry Potter, which I will count as a great children's book, they have a certain element of cruelty within them. Roald Dahl was a master at it, to get these kind of elements of cruelty, because it's a very simplistic form to get above, to have that elation of the win from being cruel, because all kids feel like they're hard done by. All of them, doesn't matter. As soon as you say no, you can't eat the slugs, they think they're being wronged. And so you can create that level of cruelty. You can put Harry Potter in a, you think about it, this great wizard Dumbledore takes a child and hands him to an abusive family that puts him in a cupboard under the stairs and doesn't go back to save him for 12 years. Makes no sense if you look at it from a pure logical point of view. If you look at it from a story point of view, it gives you something really good to not like, that you can rise above and become the hero coming out of that adversity. So it becomes a really easy mechanism to work with. And I think when you're writing for adults, you do the same thing. You just use more realistic settings.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think the Harry Potter stories, it is child abuse what the Dursleys put Harry through.
Yeah.
But it's glossed over in the way that it is, because it's written for a young audience. Whereas if it was written for adults, it would be A Boy Called It, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think, a classic for that is things like, Boy Called It, perfect example, and then compare that to James and the Giant Peach.
Yeah.
Because James and the Giant Peach is immensely cruel, and Matilda is horrendously cruel. And like you say, it's the way you bring the outcomes out of it, and the way that you use your language around it, that changes its implications to whether it's a young or an adult audience.
Your collection, Blood Ink, is a series of horror stories that are each set in a not too distant future, given the advances in technology within the stories. Yeah. Does this mean that you think the future we're creating is a potential nightmare?
I suppose part of me does. I've said, I think I've said this before somewhere. I think if you look at some of the great works of near science fiction, if you look at things like even Arthur C. Clarke, which is really hard sci-fi, if you look at things like H.G. Wells, if you look at the works of Jules Verne, going back to Frankenstein with Mary Shelley, a lot of times you are looking at things that are looking at today, and you just expand upon it a little bit, and you look at the fear of what it can do. I don't think you're trying to predict. I don't think George Orwell was trying to predict anything in 1984. I think he was just expanding upon something that was a zeitgeist of fear of the time. And I know that's why he reversed the date, because he kind of wrote it in 1948 and just reversed the date to give it a title. He wasn't saying in 1984 you're going to get this. Leave that to the reader to decide that's what you're doing, I think. Let it be reader response. But in certain ones of it, I mean, Mince Pies, for example, is my personal fear of apps. And not so much the fear of apps, but more the fear of how people perceive apps. I have this terrible fear that people will one day believe algorithms to be really smart, like the Emperor's, but be more like the Emperor's New Clothes. So, and you see it a bit now, you know, when you get that whole, I was talking to my mate the other day about spangles, and then I went on Facebook and there's an advert about spangles, and they convinced themselves that their phone is listening to them and giving them an advert, when they don't consider they've probably looked at 100 adverts that week that have not registered, and they might have talked to their mate about spangles because an advert came up about spangles, and that's why they had the conversation, and that's the only reason that they notice it. So they're giving the algorithms more credit than they're actually doing, and that's what that story was about. It was the idea that it wasn't so much the algorithm was doing anything sinister, but the people believed the algorithm couldn't be wrong, and therefore change their behavior based on an algorithm telling them something.
Yeah, so I'd like the distinction. It's not so much that the future we're creating is a potential nightmare, but people are a nightmare, and the future is just going to screw them over.
Yes, pretty much. If we can find a way of fucking it up, we will do it.
We do, yeah. That's why I voted for Brexit, definitely. So, aside from writing and reading, I know that, like me, you've got a passion for teaching creative writing. What is it that excites you about the process of creativity? And do you genuinely believe that creativity can be taught?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? What a very interesting discussion. What is it I find amazing? I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it. Maybe it's a way of just explaining my own thoughts to me. And that's what drives me to try and find out more about creativity. I think in a particular way, and I'm trying to find some sort of solace in that. I don't know. I think that's a big part of it, maybe. Can you teach creativity? Oh, that's a good one. I mean, you know, if you look at people like Hugh Menz, for example, and the way that he talks about creativity, I think we are naturally creative. I think we are born creative, and we are always creative, and it never goes away. We just believe that it does, because we are always doing stuff every single day that is creative. It's not just writing, it's everything. It's working out the best way to the shop. It's getting halfway to the shop and finding a police incident and having to reroute your way around to get to the shop. Is using creative thought. And it's like that book, isn't it? The metaphors we live by. You know, and you realize that language is so much metaphor, and we use our creative thoughts so much that I think it's more a question of teaching people how to use their creativity rather than teaching them to be creative.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think it's, like you say, it's not so much about teaching people to be creative, but getting them past that barrier where they think they're not creative people.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, I think you've definitely onto something there. Final question. What are you currently working on, and where can Oswald and I find
Hello,
more?
Oswald.
Say hello to Colin.
Hello, Oswald.
No, you know, so
It's only because I didn't bring in biscuits last time.
what are you currently working on, and where can we find out more of your work?
Currently, I'm not close to a published work at the moment, but I have got a stage play, Three Doors Down, which I've written for part of the degree that I'm doing, but it is an actual piece that I want to be getting out there as well. This has led me to actually, fingers crossed, having my first peer-reviewed article published, which would be amazing, to be a level 5 and have a peer-reviewed article is beyond my wildest dreams. But I'm also working another stage play. Funnily enough, I'm working on starting to work on a stage play on something you've written, looking at the adaptation of that. And I'm also writing a Halloween special at the moment as well, which is looking very interesting, with a magician called Russ Brown. So I'm playing in different creative writing modes at the moment and looking at different places where it can go. We had a lovely idea the other day, actually, which is we've called it Pubanormal Activity.
All right.
Okay, so the concept is nothing sells a pub better than a haunting. Ghost and haunted pubs get people coming in to have drinks. So if your pub doesn't have a ghost, pay us and we'll write you one.
Genius.
Full backstory. All you got to do is slowly release it into your community, and eventually you'll have a ghost story that sits there. It's a very cynical way of looking at it, but I just love the idea. I mean, whether we'll ever do it, I don't know, but it was a fantastic creative idea. Currently, my books at the moment, Blood Ink, which you see there, Mathamagical, Anagramophobia, my parody of The Nightmare Before Christmas, the Night Before Christmas of The Night of Halloween. They're all available on Amazon. You can find it on there. There's some poetry books on there as well. I think my next publication in the next 6 months is probably going to be a poetry book, because I've started the open mic night again. And I'm doing a particular poetry project as well, which is really nice. That's probably going to come out as an exhibition or a book in some form in the next 12 months. But I think I've got a lot of things. I mean, I've got the book. I've got a book of 70 odd poems that I was trying to write a poem a day, and I've been pulling it out to use at the open mic as this random thing. And every single one I've read so far, I thought, well, that's not too bad. Well, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. So I might publish those 70 poems, because they're there, and bring those out and share them with the world.
On a slightly related theme, have you got the haiku deathmatch themes published yet?
No, I haven't yet. I will be doing that tomorrow morning.
Brilliant.
Because I make work for myself, don't I? Because I've got the deathmatch themes, right? So this is the open mic. I got talked into doing the haiku deathmatch, so we're doing the haiku deathmatch. And when the first ones that I wrote all the themes down and made the themes into a poem itself. Yeah. So I'm now going to have to find 10 themes to write another poem in that same style. So I've created a style of poetry for myself just to make life easy.
You've created another rod for your back, yes.
Yeah. See what I mean? I'm my own worst enemy. I shouldn't be left alone. Really shouldn't.
Colin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it.
No worries at all.